infrastructure project. We have a status report that's going to be given by our House Fiscal Analyst, Sharon Reynolds, and then the Office of Health and Human Services will be coming up. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Sharon, and welcome, Sharon.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. We're up here very briefly just to reorient you to where we left you in December. And we're just going to update you on the information we presented then. At the time, we told you that this project was seeking an additional $25 million in general revenues over a several-year period to match about $130 million in federal funds. That's been slightly revised to be $27 million more to match about $127 million more from federal. We'll also provide an update on some issues we raised, and then really just set the stage for you to ask some questions of the administration on these issues. So we had told you during the status meeting that the combined overspend expected for the current year on this project out of that 25-ish million was about 14.9. As you recall, this project is a new system for the OHHS agencies integrated with HealthSource, a single point of entry for medical benefits, and replacing a number of old systems. The state had access to a significantly higher federal match than its normal administrative in order to do some of this work. The match does differ based on use, and the development costs are matched 90-10, and then there's declining rates of match. As this is, again, a slide from the prior presentation, the issue you've raised and we've raised is this the final cost? The plan was submitted in July. It does not include the child support enforcement function. We don't believe there's a formal update on that. However, they might be able to give you a little more information. But at the end of the day, what's the net cost when you only have one system? There are some systems you're running. They will go away. And then additionally, it's always been promised that there would be program integrity and personnel efficiencies that would bring the state some savings. This slide is a recap of a prior presentation, giving you the progression on the costs. You can see that the current estimate is the whole plan through 2020 is about $364 million, with $79 million of that coming from general revenues. In terms of the two-year total for the budgets you're considering this session, it's about $20.6 million more from general revenues than you budgeted for in the 16 budget, with the bulk of that requested for the current year. We've been told that the project cost drivers were primarily, were split amongst a few different things. One was some new state and federal requirements. We haven't seen detail on how that $73 million breaks out, how the big picture $150 million ad gets broken into these buckets, but also that there was a decision made to delay it a year and more fully integrate the system for some functionality that would presumably provide some additional efficiencies and therefore some savings. The contact center as well for HealthSource became an additional cost not accounted for in the prior totals. In the notion of operational savings, as we told you before, has come up in a number of different forums, and we listed for you last time that they have been projected at varying rates. That one presentation said there'd be $41 million in state savings starting in 2017 from three main pieces: program integrity, workforce efficiencies, and the contact center. There was another briefing that number was different and the buckets were different, and we tried to concentrate since the last meeting on getting a more refined number, and I believe that you'll hear from the administration tonight that the number for 2017 is more on the order of $22-23 million in savings. Again, in the same three buckets, some compliance and maximization of payers that are not the state. So if there's a federal program that has a higher match rate, the system is going to be designed to ensure people are in those places first, and the state share is maximized, the federal share is maximized. There's some operational efficiencies by automating much of the work that's currently done, and there's some cost avoidance. So to the extent there's an ask for some money, once this goes away, that ask will probably get reduced. As I mentioned earlier, there are still a number of unanswered questions, which I think are appropriate for the administration now and as you continue through the budget process in the next several months. And that is, what happens to the old system? How is child support being dealt with? We understand there's a feasibility study that's somewhere in the process, and we think it's complete, but potentially not totally. And those are all questions I think are fair to, explore the cost savings versus the added cost piece as you kind of figure out how the state can benefit or not benefit from this. I'd be happy to answer questions on the presentation, and certainly the administration is here to explain their projections.
Thank you, Sharon. Questions, Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. Sharon, how much was it supposed to cost originally, UHIP? What was the projection?
So there have been a number of projections, and it does get updated every year. So if you look at slide 5, the initial July 2013, there was probably an earlier version, but one that concluded everything was about $209 million. So this is the most significant revision. You can see the other updates didn't significantly alter the cost, but this one, this large increase, is the $154 million, and that's the piece that's being explained as both federal and state changes, some changes in functionality, and that's the piece that I think you guys have been trying to focus on. What is the reason for the increase?
Okay,
And
thank
then
you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Representative Norton.
Thank you very much, Chairman Callison. Sharon, have they identified with the cost increase the items that were increasing?
So we only have it in general terms.
All right, they haven't
So-
broken it down and with the cost.
Right, so is all of it to make it a one seamless system? No. So the idea is that even if you don't merge the two interfaces to make
Well,
it
we still
more
have the child
seamless-
support out there.
Well,
not,
that's excluded from any of these scenarios, and that's why we do raise that as an unresolved issue. But by changing the model, that added about half the new expense, and the other things are explained as changes in state and federal regulations that caused changes in the way the system had to be programmed. So it added a cost that was not envisioned to begin with because the things being incorporated were not envisioned when the cost was.
but they didn't explicitly identify what those federal or state,
No, we only have it in general terms.
only general terms. Have they identified how they envision the various users of the system to pay for it?
Users of the system in terms of the
Various departments that are using.
how they would cost allocate any
Yes.
like ongoing maintenance. We have not talked about that, but actually that's kind of probably incorporated in what are the ongoing costs of the system question. I think it's a fair
Okay.
question.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Linda. At this time, I'm going to ask Secretary Roberts to come forward and whomever else she'd like to bring. Good afternoon, Madam Secretary. Welcome. Welcome,
Good
everyone.
afternoon. It's twice in 1 week. It's delightful to be back. And actually, excuse me, could somebody hand these out to the committee members? They already have them. Wonderful. Thank you. So it is great to be here, and I want to make sure to introduce my colleagues who are here with me. Melba DePena, Director of Department of Human Services, Anya Rader-Wallach, the Medicaid Director for the state, and Tom Gerton, who's the Chief of Digital Excellence, because clearly this is a significant IT build. We are the customers and have been working closely with the contractor as well as DoIT on the construction of this project. And so I really want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. UHIP is very important to us for two reasons. It's a major tool for government efficiency. It is also a very important way to make sure we provide better services to the right people at the right time. And you're going to hear when we talk about some of this, where we're going to be booking savings, that there's a big piece of it that's about services going to the right people at the right times. So I want to give a very brief presentation, but to give a little bit of that sense of the evolution of the project, the question that was asked about kind of when we started and how we've gotten to where we are in the implementation and with our projected state savings, and the costs of changing course at this point, which I think are just important to at least mention. So UHIP began and was first kicked off as our integrated eligibility for HealthSource Rhode Island and Medicaid. We are a state that created a single system, which led to much greater efficiencies and has become the backbone of what we're calling Phase 2, which is one of the main reasons we're here talking today. It's valuable to note when you look at what's happened in other states that our system has been up and running for about 99% of the time since it was initially turned on in October of, now I've lost track of my years, 2013. And it has actually been nationally recognized because of its user friendliness and the fact that it has been functional over such a strong period of time. If you want to turn to slide 2, as I said, this started as a healthcare-only portal, and it has been expanded to include Phase 2, especially because so many of the people who qualify for Medicaid and for subsidized insurance also qualify for other services. And as you may know, through our Department of Human Services, we have had a system that is not always simple for the consumer to use. They need to go to different people for different services. This will create a single eligibility and enrollment portal. And the Director DePena can talk about that when she makes a few remarks lately. Originally, this was seen as two separate solutions that needed to connect to each other. Additional federal funding, and it's important to note that as we have put in what is called an IAPD, which is a request to the federal government for approval and funding for information technology builds, that they assess these because they're the major investor. These are significant dollars for the state, but even more significant dollars for the federal government. And they determine whether these are dollars that they want to spend. They don't spend to fix mistakes. They spend to expand capability and to make sure the system gets us where we want to go. We have a requirement to build an automated eligibility and enrollment platform. What this time that we have had over the past few years and continues this year was a much higher match rate. Otherwise, we would be building most of this functionality for the Phase 2 programs with a 50-50 match rate. Because of this opportunity, we've been able to access a much higher match rate and therefore build the same capacity with less state dollars invested. We have spent about $80 million, or we're requesting actually, if we receive the funding this year, about $80 million in state revenue over 6 years, leveraging about $285 million in federal funds to create this modern infrastructure. And it's a project that we anticipate returning its state investment within about 3 years. And we are working now, you're going to see reflected in this year's budget submission. The governor is holding us to that and saying, okay, I'm proposing taking money out of departmental budgets based on the points that you're making about how you are going to run programs more efficiently in terms of personnel, but also in terms of eligibility and enrollment. And so the governor will be proposing a budget that recognizes these savings, and you will see that. The federal government, unfortunately, timed the last IAPD so that we submitted it in July for approval in the fall. So it did not fall in line. It falls well in line with the federal fiscal year, but not with the state fiscal year, which is one reason if you look at our corrective action plan and you look at our spending, we are currently showing that as deficit spending, both for Director DePena and my department. Since submitting that corrective action plan, we are working hard to lower that number and to really look at how we will manage that budget more efficiently and move some dollars into fiscal 17 for more thorough review by this committee. But it's important to note that they approved that IAPD without amendments. So everything that we requested in terms of improved infrastructure and public-facing capacity was approved by the federal government when we submitted it in October. I'm sorry, I just went through slide 3. Excuse me for that. So actually, to take a moment, this gets to some of the question that was asked about what has been paid for under the different IAPDs. It does not specify for each one what the dollar amount is. We can get information. IAPDs are enormous, huge documents. I would offer you the IAPD, but I don't think that is something you would want to read. If there are particular areas that you want us to document what they are certifying the investment for, particularly for the one this fiscal year, then we can get that information for you. If you go to slide 4, this really gives you a visual representation of what our new system is going to incorporate in service to the customers that we serve across our agencies and with HealthSource Rhode Island. It will be a single unified system, and the long-term implications of that are significant in terms of efficiency, in terms of workforce needed. There are states right now running, just on the healthcare side, separate systems. Often you've got duplication when you don't have a good match across those systems. We're going to have a single system both for qualified health plans and health insurance and Medicaid and all of our social service programs. They will be on one platform. That has huge implications for quality of service, but also for minimizing difficulties and really minimizing the types of things we have paid in the past, penalties for inaccuracy. The automated system is going to transform that. We are going to incorporate child enforcement is the one missing piece, and we very recently received the feasibility study, which was commissioned. It was not initially considered an eligibility function, so was not allowed in the initial IAPD. There were further resources or capacity made available by the federal government, and at that time we commissioned the feasibility study. We are, to be honest, having a little bit of a dialogue with the vendor for the feasibility study right now because we have some questions about assumptions they made and the calculation that they made. So before we provide it to this committee, we want to make sure that we are in agreement with it and it is accurate. I think it came 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. So it's why it's not yet available. And the feds also have not fully approved the rules on how the child support systems are going to work. And as we're discovering in this process, the federal government changes the rules during the build. We sort of expect that, but we don't want to start the build in an absence of the federal rules. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add to that in terms of where we are in terms of the vision of the platform overall?
It's on. As Elizabeth Roberts just stated, we are. It's not on. Yeah, it was on for a second, went off. So, on the technology side of things, we built the first phase of this system in about 8.5 months, which is really unprecedented. And I joined right at the start of this particular decision in the project plan to be able to bring that together. As was stated, it was originally envisioned as a system to bring up health insurance, and then phase 2, bring in the benefit programs, but not in a single unified system or a single view of the customers. And that's part of what we spent over what we've been spending time on when we pushed out the go live for phase 2 another year, to bring in one single database, one view of the customer. As was stated, it will give us an opportunity to be able to have visibility into all the programs, to be able to cut down on some of the programs and benefits that these customers maybe shouldn't be enrolled in, and prevent us from having to do syncing between the systems. Now everyone will live in one system, and we'll have one kind of universal view of that customer. So that's been a big part on the technology side. We've also spent a lot of time building out automation within some of the DHS field offices and within EOHHS to do scanning, to be able to have everything electronic and reside in the system as part of case management. So we've taken the extra time to be able to roll that out and test it as part of phase 2 and really cut down on a lot of the manual processes. So there's a couple of big areas.
So if you go to slide
Before
5.
you do that,
Oh, excuse me.
Madam
Yes, of
Secretary,
course.
we do have the IAPD, so if anyone wants a copy, our clerk has it.
Great.
So you can.
Great, thank you.
Right.
So if you go to slide 5, you will get a sense of what is currently completed and operational, what is in development, and we're on track for a go live July 1. We did make a management decision to move that go live date from July 1, 2015 to 2016 for 2 primary reasons. One was to take advantage of this additional federal funding opportunity, which allowed us to really significantly increase the capacity of the system, and I think will make it a system that lasts longer at a highly functional level. As we all know, IT systems become obsolete. Sometimes you feel like they're becoming obsolete while you're building them. This one is really going to be transformative, and because we've created that single database, I think will allow us to really maximize the management and cost savings opportunities. So that we're going to have a worker portal and a citizen portal for people so that you can use it from your home, but you also, as a worker in the field office, can have a full look at what opportunities there are to serve the person in front of you. And we recognize the real risk with projects like this is around training and program testing. That if you turn something on and the staff is not well oriented to it, this is a big change. I joke with my staff that I started my career on punch cards. So I deal with technology, but perhaps nowhere near as well as somebody under 35. And we have a workforce that we need to train and make sure they're totally up to speed so that they're serving people well and maximizing the potential of this system. So it was a decision that we made after a lot of deliberation, and it gave us the opportunity to really build a better system than we would have had if we went live on July 1 of 2015. I wanted to turn to Director DePena and Director Rader-Wallach to talk about the estimated savings that we're looking for in the 17 budget, because it's important to note that although we start July 1, we're being conservative about savings for the first year, which is why the number is different. But I'd like them to talk some more about how they anticipate those to be generated.
Do you want me to start?
Sure. Okay.
Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our estimates of fiscal year 17 savings and why we think we can save money in fiscal year 17. I think it's important as a backdrop to understanding these numbers, which are presented on slide 6, to understand how we do financial eligibility for our programs now. We do it primarily in 3 different places. So in DHS, there are a lot of workers who either in field offices or in a central office are doing eligibility determination for a multitude of programs. In the contact center operated through called HealthSource RI, operated jointly by EOHHS and HealthSource, we also do a whole lot of financial eligibility determination for health insurance. And then within EOHHS, in Medicaid, we also have other units that do financial eligibility. We also have in both DHS and EOHHS, we do clinical eligibility for those programs where there's a clinical element where you have to meet a certain clinical standard. So there's a lot of different places where we're doing this function now. We believe that this system will bring us a tremendous opportunity for savings. The bulk of that savings, as you can see on this slide, comes from what we're calling program integrity, which is really just the concept of making sure that everybody who's on our programs is actually eligible, is legitimately enrolled based on their financial eligibility, and that they're in the right match category. So we're getting the right financial match from the federal government and maximizing the federal dollars for their coverage. And we think that this system will give us a lot more potential for making sure that we're getting both of those things right. We're going to do that really in 2 ways over the coming year. One is to improve how we do income verification. We have taken one step toward improving how we're doing that already, and that is to it'll actually be turned on in February or March of this year, but we've designed the system for doing this, and it's expanding from just using state sources to check income against through a system called SWICA to using that system plus the IRS. And by doing that, we collect a lot more information about people's income and then potentially verify either that they should be in a different aid category or that they are not eligible to a much greater degree. We currently have that in place to be turned on, as I said, in February or March, and that will be just for what we call the MAGI population, which is straight, simple Medicaid. We will expand that to other populations in July, so more complex categories of Medicaid coverage. So we're doing two things, really. Expanding the sources that we're using to check the income data against, and then expanding the extent of our enrollees or caseload that is for whom we use this system. So those are really the things that drive the savings in that first category with the $19 million. And I would say one of the important things also to understand about Rhode Island in this sense is because we're a heavily managed care state in our Medicaid program, if we don't have income eligibility right, we could be paying many times for a whole month's worth of coverage for somebody to a managed care entity, because that's how we pay. So rather than just paying claims that people might be incurring, we're paying for a full month of coverage if we don't have it right. So getting it right really quickly allows us to recoup some of those savings. The second line that you see here has to do with efficiencies in our workforce and operations. Again, I talked about all the different ways and places that we're doing income eligibility. What we're looking at with this new system is really cross-training people and making sure that we can maximize the use of the workforce that we have, and we think that we will be able to forego filling vacant positions, deal with attrition, and realize a lot more efficiency in the workforce because we're using a system that makes everybody more effective in their job. The contact center costs, I think I'll let someone else speak to those, but there are going to be we're assuming some reductions in the costs at the contact center in terms of automation and efficiency of the same sort. Things will get more efficient within the contact center, and also the interface between the contact center and Medicaid and DHS will become more efficient and more effective. And then there's a whole effort that Tom made reference to move to electronic documentation. And we think that that'll achieve a lot of efficiencies in terms of people being able to find the documents that they need, people being workers who are doing eligibility determination. They can find the document that they need right there in the system rather than having to walk over to a filing cabinet and pull it out of a paper file or get it again because it was lost. So that will be a tremendous improvement over what we do now. Melba?
Sure. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity. As Anya mentioned, at DHS specifically, we have 6 field offices throughout the state where we predominantly determine eligibility for our programs. And once the system is up and running, all of our programs, so again, with the exception of child support, will be included into the system, adding innovation and efficiency to our work. The work that we have about 300 employees in those 6 field offices, and right now the focus from my end has been, one, in projecting and really having an understanding of where these savings is going to come, because we know we could achieve them through workforce, but we really want to be very thoughtful about the which offices, which programs, and so we're right now in that process. The second thing that we're very focused on right now is the training with our workforce, understanding that this is a transformative system that's going to come in, but it's very new, and getting our workers ready. So we have divided this in 3 phases. One is understanding which of our workers need computer literacy. How do we help them become better workers with this new system? Phase 2 is the cross-training that we need to do. When I came into DHS, I found 6 field offices operating very, very different from each other, making it very, very difficult for our customers to navigate the system. And so we're working on making sure that they're standardized and that they're all working the same way and that eligibility is being determined in the same process. The third phase of our training is consisting of actually learning how to use the system. And so for the next 5-6 months, we're going to be very focused on those 2 elements. And at the end of, once we go live, we also have been working on making sure we have a contingency plan in place. Everyone, even people that are in this room, are working very hard to make sure that everything runs smoothly, but we understand that working in a project of this scope, there may be some things that we need to fix once we go live. And so it's all hands on deck right now, where we'll focus on making sure that we successfully implement the system to make sure that the impact on the customer service as we have anticipated is exactly as we have designed it. So we're available for questions. I don't know if you're going to add anything else.
No, just a couple of other things and then questions.
Yes.
So also there is cost avoidance, and I had mentioned some is short term. Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. There is some cost avoidance. Some of it is short term. And the point I made that we have an enhanced match at this point. Our average match rate is about, I think, 82%. Some of it has been 100% federal funds, some 90-10. SNAP benefits still 50-50, but we've been able to get, as you saw, from the amount the states invested versus the federal government. We also, unfortunately, have been a state that has paid sanctions on error rates more than we should. There are many ways that this system will, and we're hoping in many cases, remove all sanctions for programs because we will have computerized data feeds for verification of income. It will not be done on paper. It will be re-verified, so if somebody is no longer eligible, they will be off of programming rather than us paying a penalty, not only paying for service, but then paying a penalty when they're not eligible. So we see a significant potential for savings there. And then some of the legacy system costs will begin to disappear in fiscal 17. Clearly, there is a cost to run the system. But we're anticipating that as we know, and actually Rep. Naughton can speak eloquently about our current system and the difficulties we have with it, that we anticipate this will be a system that is much more efficient to run. And clearly the personnel needs and the ways that the actual programs are going to run that are supported by the system are going to be transformed. I'm not going to bother going through the final slide. I wanted you to have it, that there are costs actually of abandoning this last expansion in investment. But I will now stop and answer any questions. And if I didn't mention before, we have been, I think I did, around our corrective action plan. We have been working hard to minimize the impact, and we're hoping to actually eliminate the impact for the DHS budget in the current fiscal year. And minimize the EOHHS fiscal impact in this fiscal year so that most will be reviewed in the fiscal 17 budget.
Madam Secretary, you on page 6, you note that the anticipated savings in 2017 is about $20 million, and then you're projecting a $40 million savings in future years. In which of the areas do you believe that $40 million would come from? Program integrity or operational expenses?
So I think we're going to see it across a range of the areas here. I think the operational efficiencies, we've already started looking at kind of the ways that our agencies are structured, how many offices they have, where are people working to do this eligibility enrollment, how many people, as the director has talked about, kind of redesigning people's workflow. So I think you're going to see it, continue to see it in the program integrity side. But in operational efficiencies, I think we're going to see significant savings as well. But I want to note that the $22 million or the $20 million is a 6-month savings. So I don't think you're going to double it across, but I think it will be allocated fairly consistently across these categories.
And now, Director DePena, you mentioned you have 300 employees, correct, at this time. With this system, when this system comes on, now you're going to be obviously maybe replacing some of the employees with this system. What would you be doing? Would you be laying off people and transferring people?
Well, there are a couple of things. So we're not going to be backfilling some of the vacancies that, so it is important to note that there will be a transition period where from July of this year to, let's say, December, we're still focused on making sure the system is working. So basically, we'll be looking at attrition. We're not going to be backfilling some of the positions that may become vacant in that period of time. But the redesign of the offices is something that we're working on to understand exactly what the next plan will be. And we will consider all options to make sure that we meet the savings that we have been talking about here.
And Mr. Chairman, we've actually been talking with other states who have implemented systems like this to see how they have maximized the impact and get a sense from them of how they've realigned workforce and trained to be efficient.
But the cost savings and staffing, is that a 6-month estimate? Is it going to be 12-month that you're anticipating?
What you see here is a 6-month estimate.
Okay, so
because we wanted to be conservative and knowing that when complex systems like this go online, that we didn't think it was prudent to anticipating savings beginning actually July 1.
Okay,
and you will see these savings reflected in the budget that's submitted to you by the governor.
And child enforcement, what child support enforcement, what about that? What are we doing with that?
So as I was mentioned earlier, the feasibility study that was commissioned was completed this December. So right now we're reviewing all of that information and inroads will stay on to maintain that program. But we have plans of phasing in child support into the new system and actually maximize some of and use some of the solution that has been built into the system to bring in the child support the child support program to UHIP as well. But right now, the plan is that in July, when we go live, child support will not be in part of the system.
If I may add on that side, child support enforcement was never in scope for this particular project. It was not something when we originally rolled out phase 1 and plans for the other benefit programs. We've discussed it and on the way, and the feasibility study is done to determine the fit into the UHIP system and where we can take advantage of a lot of the structure that we've built out. So that's where we're kind of reviewing that feasibility study right now.
Thank you. Questions? Representative Giarrusso?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming. Looking at the infrastructure cost of the IT buildup, has anyone ever looked at, like, is there, I'm not saying like a canned thing to go into like a office supply place and buying a software program, but I mean, there are states that are, I'm sure they do this really well and they've probably been doing it a lot longer than us. Is there precedent somewhere to come up with something to share some IT from other states and probably save a boatload of money?
Sure. There's nothing that we can compare apples to apples on a project like this. First of all, we built out a whole new health insurance exchange, brand new business, and for the state and across the country. We had changing federal requirements as we were building over those 8.5 months. So we're constantly reworking the what we call the business rules engine, determining all the logic for how people qualify for programs and how to roll out health insurance programs. We certainly have benchmarked against other states where we've seen similar types of systems, and you can look at the scope and size, and actually what's been built in Rhode Island and the expenditures is smaller than many of those other states, and we've actually seen some states like Oregon that spent over $300 million and actually didn't go live with their system. They had to abandon it. So there's a number of different projects in this space that we constantly talk with the other states. We have 6 other states that we get on regular calls that all work with our same systems integrator, Deloitte, and have regular discussions and share learnings and best practices with as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'd like to stress the importance of sharing with us the changes that have required you to change what you're doing so that we can see what you've been seeing. I'm looking like work change orders that you've had to institute due to alleged changes in federal or state regulations. I think it's important for us, especially with the dollar amounts we're talking, but not only that, but with the importance we're relying on this technology to provide the services. We need to be with you and know what's going on. So if you could give us that information as to what changes incurred the additional cost. And I don't know how many of you worked on this project from the concept stage to the present state. It appears to be an evolution, and that's not a bad thing. However, originally we were told that inroads would be served by this program. And one of the fine areas was in the child support area for not having accurate addresses and reporting in timely manners. We heard about the connection to the IRS. I haven't heard about the connection to DMV or anything else to make sure that post office, they all have computer files, that many agencies, commercial, private entities, check lists to get new contacts or to verify things. I haven't heard any of that because that's a very important function. Inroads wasn't capable of doing that.
So let me start on the technology side. I was not here for the concept phase, but not long after. And
because that's where the inroads and what was told us. So right there, we're sort of on different paths, and it's important
sure,
for us.
and I may be, remiss in not understanding what was said prior to the concept stage, but when we came in and looked at the scope of work for these 2 phases, that was not something that we were talking about.
And that's why we're having this meeting tonight, and that's why we need the documentation, because there are different views, and we need to get us working together.
Yeah. So there are also, in addition to IRS, there is Social Security Administration that feeds information into it, and the credit reports, credit bureaus that will help us establish addresses and identities.
Well,
so
certainly the post office list would be on your...
Correct.
Yes, it should be on there.
Mm-hmm.
And we've built up the technology to look at a number of federal and state data sources. We get data from the Department of Health, from
and DMV,
DLT.
We have a state law.
Yes,
you have to change your address within 30 days.
Yeah, and we have interfaces into a number of those different data sources. We actually,
it was $3 million fine because DMV hadn't gotten their computer system up to DHS. We don't want those. We don't want those fines.
Understandable. And we are at times actually looking at the state data sources first to determine eligibility and validate people's income and identity, because some of them we actually have seen get updated and we can trust more so than the federal side. But we do connect to the Federal Data Services Hub. Mm-hmm. We actually spent a lot of time testing that prior to our initial release to understand the logic and the validation and verification side of things. We could get down into a lot more detail on the technical end, But we do certainly go after
Well,
every
you
data
and I can
source
do
we
that
can.
at some other time.
Sure.
We won't.
I don't
go
think
at
you
the
wanna run through
people,
that
but
now.
I think there's some. I'm interested in that because time is costly.
Absolutely.
Waiting
And
for
that's
processing.
exactly what we spent our time on,
And-
trying
and
to automate as much of this as possible.
And on the list here, page 5 that you gave us, Secretary, the project implementation status, I appreciate this kind of guide very much. I'm looking at some that are in development. And my recollection, we were supposed to be ready to go July 2015, but not the child support part.
Correct.
So I'm concerned that traditional Medicaid and SNAP, for instance, are still in development.
For July of this year.
Why weren't they already ready? You can't do beta projects and subsets of your system to see how they're running. Are we running two systems at once? We haven't had any explanation of that, nor I don't see how that's cost factored into the report you gave us.
If I may
initial
add-
scope. Go
If I
ahead.
may add,
Yeah.
we actually run 35 different systems right now for testing. We have 35 different environments that we test on a regular basis, but we cannot have multiple production systems that are live out to our customer base, because then we have issues with the integrity of the data, as well as trying to be able to sync between the existing programs that are running. in the house.
Unfortunately, someone that's not as technological.
I understand.
Could you go perhaps through what would an eligibility to technician or someone that's behind the screen looking at? Could you kind of give us an overview of how that operates or what's going on with that so that we can get a better idea?
So I wanted to clarify slide 5. So what we're trying to emphasize here is that the completed and operational, it's phase 1, which was the initial scope, which is create a health exchange through which we could just purely have customers buy health insurance. The in development means that that's the phase 2 piece where additional funding were available, and now we're adding all the health and human services. So that's exactly we're on track with the plan. And this page is just basically saying what was initially developed in 2013 and what we're going to be launching in July of this year.
The plan to us was operational July 2015.
Correct. And then once there were more additional funding, the decision was to maximize on those funding and create the worker portal that will truly unify the system.
All right, so what if next year they want to have some other thing? Are we going to keep waiting and waiting? Or when is there a drop-dead, open, active infrastructure project?
No.
July is we'll be going left July.
It is the drop. It is the drop dead.
So no matter what new thing you want to put on,
So the only new thing we're looking at, and as
Child
you know,
support.
is the child support piece. So, and we would not
oh no,
delay.
because you
would
said
not
that you
delay
were delayed
implementation.
because you want to do the federal, new and state changes. So if they come up with any more changes, are we going to keep postponing the operational day?
So part of our ongoing maintenance and operations will be adjusting to federal changes, which will come up annually, I am sure. It's the federal opportunity that we responded to, which was for major parts of the build that needed major changes. They were offering resources for them. When they make changes further along, it'll be part of our maintenance.
So I'm having difficulty understanding. If we had a date originally of July 2015, and the feds offer us more money to do that, why can't we open up and operate and still do the update and changes on the system? Why do we have to not do it for a year and keep running 35 or whatever shadow systems? And I don't see any accounting for this.
So it's not 35 shadow systems. Let me clarify that. It's test environments where we actually test.
Okay,
code.
that's another word for they're doing the work that's at the front desk, right?
No.
That's coming in.
These are internal systems that we test
Pilots.
development and run pilots and run
So you're
acceptance
running those
testing.
systems which can go live and actually process claims and requests?
No, this is to test new development to actually make sure when we put it into the live production system that it's all been vetted.
So when we were working on the July 2015 date to open the system,
That was
we
to-
didn't
that was to
have
launch
any of
phase
these
2.
35 systems getting ready to open?
We didn't have all 35, but we had many of them because we continuously develop and test new code before we roll it out to the customer base, before we put it in the production live environment. So you were talking about, do we have parallel systems? We actually have many of them, but they don't have customer data, live data in it. We just test scenarios and we test new code to be able to develop and introduce. And when we introduce that code to the live system, we know that it's been vetted and that it's going to work.
So we're paying for people to do that.
That's part of our contract. We set up systems.
And
to
we're
be
also
able to-
paying for the current system. We're
Correct,
running
but
2
that's-
systems.
It's not full systems. It's just test environments.
But it's a cost to it.
Sure, but that's part of the original contract.
So that didn't get changed with any of these new...
No. What happened is
Because I thought we had an increase in consultant costs.
because we actually spent the time, as Secretary Roberts said before, we took the time to be able to create one consolidated database, one view of the customers, versus, as I mentioned, having to sync between multiple databases, which is kind of...
Which was the original plan?
Yes, which is the back end kind of behind the scenes, not what the eligibility technicians or the customers see. But a large part of it was to be able to say, we're going to put everyone in one system so we have full integrity and we can trust the data to have one version of the truth for every customer record. And then, as Melba DePena pointed out, we can then have one view on the worker portal side as well. So we have workers that are using one back-end system to be able to see a complete view of the customers.
I think the simplest way to think of it is we are building a better system and testing it much more thoroughly than we would have if we had gone live on July of 15.
So the July 15th, we were not ready.
So we're ready with a system that didn't have nearly as much functionality, and we would not have been able to test it nearly as thoroughly and train people nearly as thoroughly as we are able to now.
And that would have been more difficult to support.
So when you go live in July 2016, we're going to have no problems.
I would never say that.
We're going to have been testing 35.
We're working towards
You would
that.
never get Bill Gates to say that either. Microsoft releases software that is full of bugs all the time.
That is
so no software or technology.
But you've been
person
working
would ever
on it
say
now at least 2 years.
I understand, and I will never say that we'll be perfect.
So, Mr. Chairman and Madam Vice Chair, one of the things that we may want to offer to the committee is a demo of this project as it's ongoing.
Please.
Because I think it might be really helpful to see what is it?
Exactly right.
But I really want to emphasize the importance of this single record system. So we're talking to some states who have duplicates in the same type of program. So somebody enrolled in health insurance and in Medicaid in the same state system because their data on the back end. What we had built was a coordinated front end, but not on the back end. And in terms of program integrity and long-term function, we made a judgment that that is an investment well worth making for its long-term budget and efficiency implications. We could have gone live last July 1. We made we think the right business decision not to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Tabone.
Thank you, Chairman. And if I may say, Rep. Norton, with all due respect, think of if you're rehabbing your house and you have your contractor do one room at a time and you stop, or you just have them do the whole thing at once, you save a ton of money. And I think that's the approach that you guys took. So that's sort of, and then the environment that they were talking, the 35. Think of maybe law school students sitting in a room getting a bunch of information. Getting a bunch of information, and then you have the real lawyers in the front working, and they're practicing with that information, and it's not interrupting the work they're doing. So that's sort of how, but anyway, all right, so that's, I was just thinking in my head, I do things in my head all the time.
All right,
So in regards to the system, how long, you'll be doing continuous updates. How long do you think this will be like a current technology before we have to do, not an overhaul, but revamping it, and how much I mean, we don't know how much that could be.
Sure.
But do you think that it's going to take us 5 years, 10 years out? As we do updates on the software and
we do regular updates on the software, as I mentioned. That's true.
Yeah.
Of any large software company. Never mind, the endeavors that we take on as part of the state. We endeavor to get to a stable system before we even go live and put it out into the production space for customers to use. So we try to take every measure possible to try not to add functionality or add code for a period of time. We actually call it a code freeze, where we don't touch the system, make sure that it's performing well. But we have regular maintenance and operations, and that includes software.
Let me just say, maybe I should rephrase it. How long before this technology is obsolete?
So I was just about to get to that.
Okay.
So we have regular maintenance and operations staff, including technologists, that will be maintaining the system. Certainly, we need to account for any changes that happen on federal or state requirements, legislative changes. But I would say the system that we're building now is all built on a modern technology platform using the latest applications development code, and should certainly serve us well for 20 plus years. And that's probably about the best you can get out of any technology system, given the rate of change on the technology side nowadays. I don't know, you probably all are on your, at least fifth version of a smartphone that you've had, and that smartphone is actually more powerful than anything that was around 20 years ago. So that's kind of the outlook that we have.
In regards to the system that, the front end, the back end, so if people start punching in their information, does the system have all the things in place where it kind of makes a decision before a human being looks at it?
Yes, that's a big part of the lift on the technology side. I mentioned the business rules engine. You can have a family that every member of that family is on a different program. So it goes through the eligibility across every individual. So it's not simple.
So I'm thinking, it reminds me of almost like the digital underwriting programs for banks and mortgages and all that.
Yeah, not dissimilar.
And so, they get your credit, all that stuff, and then they punch it in and they say either you pass or you don't. And if you don't agree with that, then there's opportunity for override, and then there's a human being who goes behind. How much time would it be between the moment where someone may say, I don't agree with this, there's some discrepancy, once someone in your office goes and addresses it, and how long would that process be? Because then that's where the savings sort of start getting lost.
So let me answer the first part of that, if I can ask Director DePena for the second piece. The system determines eligibility and goes through calculations in split seconds.
Yeah.
We're looking at multiple sources of data, federal and state, to make those determinations, even on a complex situation in a family like that I mentioned. Depending on whether you are doing that transaction at home at midnight or on a weekend, or in an office with a broker or navigator, third party, or in a DHS or EOHS field office or the contact center, the follow-up, the ability to override, the ability to add case notes and get documentation, scan it, add it to the customer's record, can be minutes. Or if you're doing it at midnight or on the weekend, it can be the next time you come into that office. But the system itself, when things don't flow automatically, actually creates a task queue that workers see, and it shows up. They can log in and actually work those cases. Whereas, we mentioned some of the program integrity. There are times where program integrity takes 8 months for us to follow up on cases right now. Now we actually run programs every month, sometimes every week, but every month we see thousands of people that we reevaluate their eligibility and that data integrity on an automated fashion. So we're seeing thousands of people that we're reevaluating on a regular basis versus relying on humans to do it once a year.
Great.
Okay. If the system denies an application, the person has the right, of course, to come into the field office and have one of our technicians review the case, just in case there's some errors that were typed into the application. If it's determined to be a denial still after a human being reviews it, then they go through a hearing where all of the elements of the applications are reviewed, and then a determination is rendered to the individual.
Great. Okay. That's it. Thank you,
Thank you.
Chairman.
Representative Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm more interested, I get how the system works. I'm more interested in how much it cost to build. And I'm just wondering, who is providing oversight to the vendors?
So that comes in a number of areas. The Office of Digital Excellence, I'm the Chief Digital Officer of the state, head up. We have project managers, technology project managers that work directly with the systems integrator. We also have what's called an IV&V vendor, independent verification and validation. They serve as an extension to our staff to be able to run regular reports and updates and do checks on the work that the systems integrator performs, and also report that back to CMS and the federal side. So it comes both within the Office of Digital Excellence and the Department of Administration, with that third party that was mandated by the federal requirements to have that IV&V vendor in. And also we have the three major agencies that interface with other third parties, other technologists and developers and business analysts that work on the project on a regular basis too.
So when they make an error or they are not doing it in a timely fashion, when the reason that the cost is escalating is because of your technology folks, who absorbs that cost? Do they absorb it, or do we just raise the contract?
It depends on the reason. There have been where it might be changes in functionality or scope. But there can be.
I'm not talking about changes that have been mandated
Sure.
by state requirements or federal requirements.
Right.
I'm talking about when they're really not doing their job well.
We have had our third parties on the technology side absorb millions of dollars when they've made mistakes.
And do you have a list of when that's happened? Or the charges that they've absorbed rather than the taxpayer has absorbed?
I'm sure we can provide that documentation, yes.
Okay. When you have a contract, do you who reviews it and who makes sure that, I'm just amazed at the cost overruns. And if you were a private business, you wouldn't accept these kinds of cost overruns. Your contracts would be tight enough that it just wouldn't keep escalating. This is a 50% increase, more than a 50% increase.
So I would say on the evaluation of those changes, we have three different groups that look at that. We have a technology committee that reviews every new contract, every change.
And do they review it next to private industry standards? What is typical on private industry contracts?
We run through many of the same courses of action and take a look at it with the same diligence. We also have a finance committee that is across all the agencies. And we have a project management team that runs through every change in scope or a new contract amendment. And we have a leadership group that meets weekly to run through the project itself and discuss some of those changes. I wouldn't classify all of them as cost overruns. That would, as we've said, we've had many times that we've gone back because of changes in federal funding or requirements that has changed the approach, the business approach, as well as the technology build.
So when you have a change order, what's the process there? There is, if it's 10,000, if it's
that
2 million,
order,
is there a difference?
We develop the scope, we develop the specifications for that change order. That change order is drafted by the third party, whether it be Deloitte or one of the other technology vendors or project vendors. That is then reviewed by those three groups I just mentioned, and then is seen by the leadership table, depending on what week it comes up in the process. And we have that all documented and followed.
And Representative, if I could add in, that I think it's important that we've got the oversight in terms of if there's a mistake or something, but that what is called an overrun, if we were purchasing building the exact same thing and spent more money, I would say you are absolutely correct. On what basis would we have done that? But I think what's important is that what we are able to do with this project has expanded and therefore will yield more benefit. And the federal government, who's the major investor here, as we've applied each time, so it's been 4 or 5 different applications. Each one has been intensively reviewed and overseen. And it does more. It isn't that it's doing the same thing for more money. And I think that's really important. I think in private business, the same happens. You say, wow, if we invest in this, we can get even more benefit from it. And that is what we have been doing. I think it's an important distinction.
Yeah, I guess I'm more concerned that when we spend taxpayer dollars, we are actually getting maximum value out of it. And I just that oversight, what the contracts look like, how tight are they, so that if they're not doing their job well, the taxpayer just isn't throwing more money and saying, hey, why don't you learn what you do on the job?
So I couldn't agree with you more. And I would say some of the scrutiny, there have been times we've complained about the scrutiny because it has actually slowed some of the process because of the intensity of the scrutiny from the IVV, that outside vendor they work for businesses. I mean, their job is to make sure we're tightly run. Our purchasing department has been very strict. They will not, and they have sometimes pushed back again and again and again to make sure there is nothing being spent here that shouldn't be spent. So I think there has been a lot of oversight, a lot of scrutiny. But I think we felt strongly that we had a business opportunity here that we could partner with the federal government, and that waiting to make some of these investments, closing the project and then building more later, where the state taxpayer was going to be responsible for a higher percentage of that investment. We really wanted to push this as quickly as we could responsibly so that we got the maximum federal investment for our project.
Yeah, I think you understand in light of the DMV project, which just seemed to mushroom and never had a deliverable, that there's some skepticism out there. Do you know if there's a standard coefficient that you put in for overhead charges on your contracts?
I think that would be best addressed by the Central Business Office. And I was going to mention, when Secretary Roberts was just talking about the oversight, we also spend a lot of that time reviewing contracts with the Central Business Office and with Director Wolmer of the Office of Management and Budget. So they'd be best to answer that.
Okay. Just one other question. I see that from the integrity of the program, you're expecting $13.5 million in savings, and that is some fraud as well as some enhancement of benefits so that they kind of balance. Opportunity cost, $13.5 million reduction due to integrity and fraud.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at a $19 million. Can you tell me which page you're on? Excuse me.
Last page. This one. Fourth column, opportunity cost. This is if we abandon it, but you said we would lose the enhanced program integrity fraud reduction, and that was $13.5 million.
Right.
So can you explain that figure? So we'll be snuffing out some fraud, but also giving people enhanced benefits because now they'll qualify across.
I actually think the way this is written, this is a reduction in both. A reduction in the enhanced program integrity and a reduction in our ability to detect fraud. Yes. So right now we're on a paper-based system to do the some of the program integrity work. We get the unemployment batch printed out. Some of those things which are going to be incredibly rapid in the current system. Those will be reduced, therefore our benefit from that will be reduced. Our Medicaid recertification, that's probably our biggest number there. So it's about a reduction that we would see because we were unable to use the enhanced system to do that coordination. That's what the 13.5. I can go back if you would like, and we can get the actual detail that backs up that number. I don't have it on the slide.
Any detail would be welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Ruggiero.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I see the benefit of what you're saying, I think, with this fully integrated system so that we're not working in silos and we have the back end that is somewhat coordinated. It is curious calling this integrated system for DHS Rhode Island bridges, considering we do have the worst bridges in the nation, but I couldn't let that one go by. But I did want to talk a little bit about because I think the system is actually going to be most effective depending on who is inputting the data, as we talked a little bit earlier. So the workforce is critical, and as we know, people who are 35 and under are digital natives. So I'm curious, what % of the DHS workforce is 35 and under. And for those who are over 35 at DHS, and they're not, maybe they don't have computer literacy, what role is there for them and what happens?
That's a great question. I actually just completed an assessment where we struggled with how do we assess computer literacy. Asking someone, are you comfortable typing in information? So we determined that an assessment that we mailed to our workers, they sat on their computer and asked very similar questions on computer, and depending on their answer, we have, and I could provide the information because we just completed it today. We will have the individuals that we feel do not have the capacity to work on the system that's being developed. In the next 3 to 4 weeks, all of those employees who, let's say, failed the assessment will receive computer training based on what element of the 3 modules they failed. And so that is what I called the initial phase of the training. It's a very comprehensive training, and we will be doing that in the next 3 weeks.
And do you know what percentage are 35 and under in DHS?
Right. I don't have the percentage. However, it's not really age-related.
No, but there's
not.
just a comfort with somebody who's grown up.
Yeah. Most of our workers are older than and have been at the department for more than like 15, 20 years. So, and that's the reason why I felt that it was necessary to conduct the assessment, because we were making a lot of assumptions that everyone at DHS would know how to use the system. It's not an offensive approach to try to determine how prepared people were to. For example, our system does not use a mouse. It's basically F1, F3, F4 for the different panels, where this system would be more clicking and using the mouse.
Otherwise, you'd hate all of Tom's work to go for naught when somebody's inputting all the wrong data.
Correct.
No, the interesting piece, though, is that not all the data is being input by DHS employees now. So we're allowing the customer to self-serve. So there's the vast majority of it that we're trying to do either through the customer or through the brokers and navigators, those third parties, to help those customers out.
And if we wanted to I know you said you'd do a demonstration, but if we wanted to navigate the system ourselves, how could we do that?
That's the other interesting point. I mean, we've had a system that's been up and running. You mentioned the DMV. I mean, this system's been up and running now, and we built it in 8.5 months since October 1st, 2013. So go to HealthSource RI, and you can walk through a scenario. You can browse anonymously without having to.
Oh, so it's that's the actual portal, and then the back end on your part is how you're getting all of the information from DHS. Okay.
Correct.
So
yeah.
we will be adding all of the Phase 2 programming, but the infrastructure will be very much what you're seeing today on the HealthSource Rhode Island.
That I've been on. Very good. Thank you.
I liken it to a doorway, and on July 1st, the doorway goes to a lot more places. But it's there now to go to certain places.
And every door is also a window.
And every door is the right door.
All right. Thank you very much. Representative Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I want to applaud you for continuing in this initiative since your time as Lieutenant Governor, when you took the leap of faith with the HealthSource Rhode Island, brought it online, and now your initiative on continuing to go back with these advanced planning documents. So often we hear of money being left at the table at the federal level, and here we are seeing a 5-to-1, almost a 5-to-1 match to state taxpayer dollars to give such a more improved product at the end. So I just want to come out with a statement to applaud you and all of your efforts at DHS for this information. I just want to follow up on Representative Ruggiero's question, because she kind of stole my thunder there, was basically the workforce development end of the equation. Are, in fact, your employees being trained now, ultimately, so that when July 2016 hits, it's not a new adventure for them? They're actually playing with it now so that it won't be a new experience starting July 1, 2016. If you can just elaborate a little bit more on that.
So there is training going on now. There's more training going on at DHS. They're a little ahead of where we are at EOHHS, but we have training in both places. And in addition, we have a lot of testing going on. So actually, that's what my folks are involved in more than the training per se at this point, is testing the system, running test scenarios to make sure that the system is working right. And as the experts who know how cases should end up, they take the test cases through and make sure that you get the right results so that the system will be functioning right. We will go into a full-blown training program with employees at EOHHS and at DHS over the next several months. And as Melba said, that will be at different levels and in waves. But by the end, we expect that everybody will be facile and comfortable with the system.
The other element that I would like to add is that we already have a number of employees who have gone through what we call pilots, where they're entering information into both systems right now, just to test the accuracy. So they have become very, very engaged in the process, and they love the system. So we're using them as champions, and they're part of the trainers. So they're going into the field offices. I'm using their excitement to get the rest of the employees to be engaged with the system, because it does create a lot of anxiety to learn something new, something that it's so different than what they're accustomed to. So the trainer element of the training has been fabulous, and it's working very well right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Before you go, though, I do have a question. Is there any way that you could get us information of actually how you're saving in these areas? Like how much, what are you finding, like in Medicaid? What are you finding in some of the other programs that are up and running? How it's actually being saved? What, I think you understand what I'm saying. You know, I can't even get this thing to work in front of me here, this computer. So, but,
just to clarify, you're talking about the existing system that's up and running.
The one that's right, whatever you like up and running. If you could kind of outline that, what you're saying, because I'd like to look at that a little bit more.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming this evening, and that'll conclude the hearing.